David, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So welcome, everybody. Uh, this is my talk, Getting Data from Dataverse inside of Microsoft Teams. My name is Dave Patrick. A little bit about me. I'm a SME at the U.S. Army for APG, Aberdeen Proving Ground in Northeast Maryland. SME, that's a funny word. Subject matter expert. That's it's our way of saying I do a little bit of everything. I really do a lot of SharePoint development, SharePoint administration, SharePoint training, but I also do ASP.NET web development, SQL Server administration and development, and I sweep floors when necessary. So I'm a DoD contractor with a company called DSA Inc., Data Systems Analyst. We love our acronyms. I'm not a big fan of acronyms, and I went to work for the Army 10 years ago, and it's just a sea of acronyms. So, and of course, I've got a bunch after my name: MCT, MCSE, ABCD, MOUSE. One that I think is particularly funny is the MCP DED. That's Microsoft Certified Professional Developer, Enterprise Application Developer. Microsoft came up with that one. I swear they came up with that one when they saw how many exams I was taking. I've taken over 100 exams, and I've passed almost half of them. And they said, let's come up with a certification that this guy will be, he won't want to promote, but jokes on them, I wear it loud and proud. So I'm an MVP. I've gotten 6 awards. I've got my first way back in 2009, and I also teach on the side. I'm an adjunct professor for University of Maryland, Towson University, Stevenson University, and I run a couple user groups. There's one out there called Baltimore Cloud. You can find us on meetup.com. We meet both virtually and in person, so hybrid meetings. That's sort of a bonus or a silver lining of the pandemic is that we had to learn how to do hybrid meetings. Well, we went virtual, and now we're hybrid. And Mad SharePoint, which has 2 meanings. It's officially Mid-Atlantic Developers SharePoint user group, but unofficially, anyone who's used SharePoint knows that sometimes it delights you and you can be mad about it. Other times it can frustrate you and you're mad at it. So that's our sort of play on our name for that particular user group, Mad SharePoint. Little plug for my company, been around forever. I had never heard of them 10 years ago. I thought I'd be there 6 months, and I just recently signed up for the 401k because I thought, after 10 years, I might be there a while. I'm actually still considered a rookie there. There's people that have been there 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. It's ridiculous. They do everything. They don't just do SharePoint. They do all sorts of stuff. So if anyone's interested, check out that URL, tinyurl.com, DSA job. We've got positions all over the United States. You do have to be a U.S. citizen, get clearance and all that. But we've got positions actually in Hawaii, which they're looking for Java developers. I keep telling them I know JavaScript, and they say, no, that's not the same as Java. But I'm like, please send me to Hawaii. We also, just recently, I saw we have positions in Italy. So I'm not sure what that's about. I'm going to go learn whatever I need to be sent to Italy because I think Italy is awesome. So yeah, check us out. Little plug for my user group. So Baltimore Cloud is where we talk about things that are cloudy, like Office 365 and Azure and things like that. So, and as I mentioned, you can attend from anywhere. So I've had people from, the UK attend, even though there's, a significant time difference. We usually meet like the second Tuesday of the month at noon. So yeah, and if you're in the area, come on by. We like to give away free swag. We like to give away free lunch. So it's a lot of fun. And I actually brought some prizes. I understand we're giving away a $25 gift certificate at the end of this, or at least the organizers are giving away that. So thank you guys for that. But I brought, if you can see on the camera, it's kind of blurred out there, but basically they are passes to 1 month free subscriptions to Pluralsight. So they sent that to my user group to hand out to my user group members, and I've got a few extras. So being an adjunct professor, I like to do pop quizzes. So there'll be a pop quiz at the end of this, see who was paying attention, and if you can give me the right answer or an answer that's close enough to the right answer, I'll give you one of these free passes if you want it. All right, so what's the agenda for today's talk? I know you guys have had a long day. It's been a full day of lots of information. So hopefully this talk will give you at least 3 golden nuggets to come away with. 1, how to get started with Dataverse, how to actually provision your Dataverse for Teams environment. 2, how to create your first table in that environment. So as we're going to learn, Dataverse is all about a database in the cloud. You want to create a table. It's going to have columns. You're going to enter records in those columns. I'd like to show you how to get started, create that table. And then maybe if we have time, which I think we do, we'll do things like how to back up that database, how to restore that database, how to export. And the last thing is building an app around that table. So when you create data in Dataverse, usually, especially from teams, usually it's with the intent that you want to build an app around that. So you can create what we like to call CRUD operations, the create, read, update, and delete operations, where someone can enter data, keep track of that data, update that data, remove that data when necessary. I've been building those types of applications for 30 years in various technologies, and they're still in high demand today. So hopefully those would be the three things you'll walk away with. So before we jump into all that, I like to do a quick intro to Teams, which is kind of funny. When we started doing these at the beginning of the pandemic, oh, and I got my hat on. I don't know if anyone saw that, but thanks to the organizers for this cool hat. It actually is pretty cold over here in Maryland, so I've been getting a lot of great use out of it. So I thought I'd show it off and show my appreciation for that. So this is what the Army likes to refer to as the bluff, the bottom line up front. I mentioned that the Army, that DoD loves, Department of Defense loves acronyms, and they always ask me if I get in an elevator with one of the higher ups, they're like, Dave, give me the bluff. I don't have time for you to tell me all the nitty-gritty details. Just give me a quick intro to Teams. And so what is Teams? Teams is a chat-based workspace in Office 365. The Army used to use SameTime from IBM, which was, just instant messaging. But Teams is really so much more than that, right? So it does, for my higher ups, I'll say, hey, replace the same times. But it's also for collaboration. We can do customization, and it's got great security. That's the bluff. Now, what does that mean? It's a hub for teamwork. What does collaboration mean? That's a nice 4-syllable word. It means that I can open up a Word document that's stored, that was uploaded in Teams, which is stored in SharePoint Online seamlessly, meaning I didn't have to go somewhere else to upload it to SharePoint. When I upload it into a conversation, into a channel in Teams, it's magically stored into, or automatically stored into SharePoint Online for me. And someone else can click on it, and we can both work on it together. We can collab, we can co-author that document. This is nothing new. Teams didn't produce this functionality. We were doing this back in 2010, SharePoint 2010, but it made it so much more accessible. So now people are really finding that I've had people ask me, Dave, should I use Teams or should I use SharePoint Online? And I'm like, if you're using Teams, if you're uploading files to Teams, especially if you're in a team with channels, you're using SharePoint Online, whether you know it or not. I'm still surprised how many people are like, what? So it really is, Teams has really helped SharePoint to gain this new kind of audience, where some people in the past were, I hate SharePoint, I won't use SharePoint, and now they're using it. As I mentioned, customizable, so you can add your own apps. I saw in one of the earlier talks, they were talking, the keynote, Mark was showing how we add lists to Teams. And of course, the built-in Office 365 security, the Azure AD directories, so we can have that sort of enterprise level security applied, is fantastic. One of the things I like to talk about, I mentioned collaborating with Teams, is a tool that Microsoft put out that helps us to demonstrate some of the features in Teams. And not a lot of people are aware of this tool. So this tool it's a click through. It's not really Teams. It's a website, teamsdemo.office.com. And I'll put it out there in the chat if anyone's interested in it. It allows you to demo Microsoft Teams without having to go into Teams, and that's nice because you can actually, it's difficult sometimes to have a Teams meeting and then try to show some features of Teams. And it's really nice because what my higher ups will do is I'll just email them this link. I'll say, hey, go to this link, and let me go back out so I can actually show you guys the link. And I'll have them walk through. There's actually a couple different experiences, desktop or mobile. It takes about 5 minutes to knock through it. And some of the benefits of this is that they can't mess anything up. So they're not in anybody's tenant. They're not in the production tenant. They're not in some other tenant. But they can walk through and kind of get a feel for some of the features of Teams that they may not have been experiencing previously. So it walks you through the left-hand navigation. What does this little 2 mean? What does this little 3 mean? It talks about activity and what that does, and chat and what that does. And as they walk through this on their own time, or you could be demonstrating it in a lunch and learn. I use this in a lot of my lunch and learns that I do. They can say, oh, look, this is how I could join or create a team. And a lot of people haven't created their own team. So this is a nice way for them to see that process without, again, actually doing it. So they're not worried about, adding a team that's not going to be used in the production environment. So it walks them through. I think in this particular example, they copy an existing team. They give it a new name. They choose some things that are going to be included with the team. And then once they do that, it walks them through not only the creation of the team, but then managing the team, adding members to it, And it uses sample data. This is all Microsoft sample data, setting up owners. And then once, again, you do that, it shows you, okay, there's the team you've created. There's some other teams, how you can discover them. It shows you the use of the ellipsis, which a lot of people were, it's kind of a not very intuitive that you got to go hit the ellipsis and then you can find all these menu items. So this tool does a really, really good job of walking someone through, in this example, managing a team after it's been created, looking at the owners, looking at the members and guests, promoting a member to an owner if need be, looking at other teams, working inside of a channel and a team with conversations, seeing the difference between a private team versus a public team. In this example, they're demonstrating threaded conversations, which is a pet peeve of mine. I don't know how many times we'll have a conversation in a channel and someone will, instead of responding to the discussion, they start a new discussion that kind of gets things messy. So this kind of walks people through that. I'll oftentimes send this link to people that are guilty of that and say, hey, here's how it should be done. This shows them how to mention people. Again, that's a feature that some people are like, oh yeah, I know how to do it, but then I don't see it used a whole lot, It'll even show off some features that were new. When this tool first came out, we've been using this for a while now. It didn't have the translation feature. So now this is demonstrating interacting with someone who speaks Spanish, Diego down here. He replies to Bianca in Spanish. Well, Bianca doesn't know Spanish, but she can just use the built-in feature in Teams to translate it to English. And so that's another kind of wow factor where people are like, oh, I didn't even know Teams could do that. Yeah, a little bit of training. One of Microsoft's greatest criticisms is that they do such a good job of demoing, hey, look, Teams is so great and so easy to use. Why don't you go ahead and just throw it at your users and let them get started? They kind of downplay the importance of training. And so as a Microsoft certified trainer, my job is to go through and say, hey, you know what, let's just do a little bit of training. Let me get you started. Let me show you some of the features that you may not have been aware of because you've just been doing self-training or self-discovery. This tool really helps with that. What talks about sharing files. It talks about the Files tab, uploading. It talks about the difference between chat in a channel versus chat, just the regular chat where files get stored up in OneDrive. So it really does a good job of walking through all those little features, explaining how they work, what it actually looks like. So here we are, we're doing, I think, we're formatting the text in a chat with Emily. We're renaming the chat to a. This is a good feature too, where if you're in a chat with like 3 or 4 people, or in this case, it looks like it's 6 people in this chat. I've been guilty of this. You guys have to tell me if you've ever encountered this situation where you're in a chat and when it's not renamed, you can't see, if I go back here, you can't see, you only see the couple people that have been added to the chat. And then, the 6th or 5th person is kind of off. It's, it's not displayed. So, right, it says here, Megan added Alan and 2 others. Well, who are those 2 others? So, be careful because I've said in the chat, well, Rodney, he's really terrible at that. And Rodney's like, hey, I'm in the chat. Stop talking about me. I go, oh, whoops. So if you give it a better name, Project Wildfire discussion, then I'm not fooled into thinking it's just me, Megan, and Alan. It's, oh, this is all about the Project Wildfire. I know Rodney's on that project. So again, a really great tool. I'll just kind of get through the rest of it. You guys can play with this on your own. But it really does do, I think, a fantastic job of those initial features, some of the explanation of the different little not very intuitive interfaces. All right, let's talk about Dataverse. So a little history. When it first came out, we called it the Common Data Service, and then Microsoft said that's not a very marketable name. Let's come up with a better name. We'll call it Microsoft DataFlex Pro, which DataFlex. But that turned out that was copyrighted, so didn't last very long, and they had to come up with yet another name, maybe a better name, Dataverse. So Dataverse was born, or the name of it was applied, and now it's part of the Microsoft Power Platform. And they came up with a new logo. I got to update this slide. But it is part of the Microsoft Office 365 family, right? So Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents, all those tools integrate very nicely with Dataverse. And when I say integrate, what does that mean? It means that in just a couple of clicks, if I'm in Dataverse and I want to take some data out of a table and visualize it in Power BI, it's just, go get that data, open it in Power BI and see the data. And I'll demo that in a second. So there's not a lot of clicks between working with Power Apps and Dataverse or Power Automate and Dataverse. It really is, I've worked with, when early in my career, I was all about doing integration. And, you know, I had a company once where, an insurance company where they had two different screens, green terminals for the old folks. And, you know, they were literally hand jamming data from one screen to another. That's the opposite of integrated, where you're literally having to manually take data out of one system and put it in another. This is the complete opposite, where they all talk to each other very nicely. Now, I'm going to make use of a tool called Microsoft Learn. If you haven't seen Microsoft Learn yet, it is Microsoft's website for documentation, but don't let that fool you. It's not just documentation. This is a particular article that describes what is Microsoft Dataverse. I like this little two things I like to point out here. One is that they talk a little bit about how the names have changed, and they warn you, you know, we used to call it entity, now it's table. We used to call it field, now it's column. There's some more information about that. And I point that out. That's important because there are some still places, and I'll talk about the different places where the old names are still applicable and the new names are showing. So you have to kind of be aware of that. It helps to be aware of that. The other thing, is this down here. I like this little description. Basically, it's a what is Dataverse? It lets you securely store and manage data in the cloud in a set of tables, relational database. What's a table? Set of rows, columns, kind of like an Excel spreadsheet, but much different. I don't know how many people, you know, hey, I've got a database and it's really just an Excel spreadsheet. Well, you know, it's not a relational database and it's not in third normal form. I spent 10 years as a SQL DBA and I teach, you know, databases at Towson University. So, you know, I'm always telling my students that you got to have proper primary keys and proper foreign keys and proper relationships. And you want to minimize redundancy. You want that, what they call third normal form. And Dataverse is a relational database. It allows you to do that. So that's what this is talking about. So let's see it. So this is Dataverse, right? This is me and there's a couple different ways you can access it. So this is me in Power Apps. And over on the left-hand side, I clicked on Dataverse, and then I clicked on Tables. So in my Dataverse, I've got the standard tables that come with a Dataverse database, things like account and customer address. You can also create your own custom tables. So I created a table called Burger to store different kinds of burgers. And then on the right of that, you can see some of the information about it. The name of the internal name of the table. Notice this one, because it's custom, has a different prefix. Whether it's managed or not, whether it's customizable. This information about the table, that's called metadata. It's data about data. And Dataverse allows you to not only work with the data, but also with the metadata. And that's one of the, the reasons why you want to use Dataverse. It's very easy to manage. Metadata and data are both stored in the cloud. Don't have to have a certain program to access it. Don't have to have a certain operating system to access it. It really is easy to manage. Also easy to secure because it's centrally located and uses role-based security from Office 365. So you just add the users to the different roles and assign them the different permissions. If you're already using Dynamics 365, you're already using Dataverse, so that makes it a lot easier. Metadata, I mentioned, there's relationships, data types, there's all sorts of different data types, so just lots of different choices, rich metadata. You can add calculated columns, business rules, workflows, so all sorts of logic and validation are available to apply to the data that's stored in Dataverse. And then my favorite is that productivity tools, Power BI and all that, but specifically Microsoft Excel. So I don't know how many times people have said, Dave, I've got my data in Microsoft Excel, and I say, well, I want to go put it in SharePoint so it's centrally located, or I want to go put it in Dataverse so it's centrally located. And they're like, oh, I have to pry it out of my code. I want to keep using Excel to manage the data. With Dataverse, you can do that. Now, if I put it in SharePoint, they can export it to Excel, but they can't write it back. With Dataverse, they can export it to Excel, work on it, and publish the changes back. So you get all four CRUD operations: create, read, update, delete. Opening data from Dataverse in Excel uses a special add-in, Office 365 add-in, that provides those four operations. So that's another one, a wow factor when you're working with Dataverse. So let's look at one of these wow factors. This is Power Apps again. This is an old screenshot. I left this in here just to show you, in the beginning with the UI, we had, entities and option sets versus tables and choices and columns. So in Dataverse, you can click this little get data up here. This is, again, I talked about it being very integrated, and this is some of the entities, just like we saw earlier. But when I click that get data, and now I've switched the interfaces on you to show you the new names. So there's tables, There's tables and columns and choices over here, tables and choices, and etc. But by clicking that data, now notice one of the options is to just analyze it in Power BI. So when I click that, what's going to happen is it's going to download a Power BI connection file, which is going to automatically open in Power BI desktop, and it's going to know the URL of the Dataverse environment that my database is located in. That's what that is right there. And from there, I can choose different tables that I want to visualize in Power BI. So I kept it really simple. I just chose the account table. I get a little preview of the data, say, oh, yep, this is the right database. Because there is an issue sometimes. I'll try to talk about some of the gotchas that you can run into when working with Dataverse. Different environments. There's a lot of different environments that can exist, and so, a lot of times I'll be in the wrong environment. And so this little preview helps me. Oh, okay, I'm in. That's the data I expected to see, so I think I'm in the right environment. So the other thing you can do if you're not familiar with Power BI is, yeah, I could just load the data, which is what I'll do. But if I needed to transform the data, you can do what's called ETL, extract, transform, and load, which is a way of saying, okay, maybe instead of a full name, I want to break that into first name and last name. So you can split columns, you can remove blank rows, you can remove columns, you can add calculated columns, all sorts of, using Power Query, you can do all sorts of transformations to modify and manipulate your data before you load it. So in this, again, I kept it really simple. So I just went and loaded my data. And then a nice thing about Power BI is that it recommends visualizations for you. So in this case, I selected revenue and website URL, and it said, oh, that looks like a bar graph might be a good visualization for you. Now you can change that. If I wanted to go over here into the visualizations, I could click on like a pie chart or a map or whatever. Though I have a friend who's a visualization expert. He told me, Dave, never use a pie chart. He said it's really bad for seeing different, a 33% slice versus a 40% slice. It's not that big of a difference, and it's hard to see that difference. So you got to be careful when choosing pie charts, which is a real shame because I love pie charts. I love all the color, and so that's usually my go-to. But so here we got a bar chart, and you can sort it by biggest to smallest. So I can see here that the Coho Winery is not a big seller, not a big customer. Maybe I need to go out and visit them, drink some of their wine, and schmooze them so they can make more purchases. Really, what I was trying to point out here is that we went in just a few clicks from Dataverse to Power BI. So that's what I really mean by integrated. Just bam, bam, bam. Now I'm looking at my data in Power BI that's stored in Dataverse. And I could have went the other way. So you notice up in here in the corner, there's not the corner. Get back there. I'm jumping around a little fast there. Let me go back. There we go. That's what I get for click. I get click happy. There we go. What I was going to point out is that in the Power BI interface, there's the other way. I could have started here and gone to Dataverse right here. There we go. But if I do it that way, then I got to know the URL of the environment that I want to connect to. That's why it's nice to start out in Dataverse. You know where you're at, and then just go ahead, create that connection file that's got all that information. All right, so back to Dataverse. Again, I'm in Power Apps. I'm looking at my fields. Now, again, this is an older screen, and I left this in there so I could show you, it used to be called fields. Now it's called columns. But there's that data, the metadata, right? It's the name of the tables. It's the internal name of the table. I'm looking at the account table. These are the columns, right? So the account column, the internal name of the column, what's its data type, whether it's required or optional. So that's more of that rich metadata that we talked about, available to manipulate, make changes, and add to right in through the browser or through Teams. If I scooch over here and click on the data tab, so I clicked over here on data, now I'm working with the actual data. So now here I am working with account names, phone numbers, literally adding records. You can add up here in the corner, you can see you can add records. I could click a record and edit the record. I could delete a record. So the full CRUD operations are available right there in the browser to work with the data inside of Dataverse. So a little tidbit about the old names and where you might find some of the old names. In the Power Apps user interface, you're going to have the new names for the most part. Table, column, row, choices, yes, no. If you're working with the software development kit, you're still going to see some of the old names, entity, attribute, record, etc. And if you're working with the Dataverse web application programming interface, again, slightly older names. And one of the reasons for that is, and there's a whole article on it if you want to check it out, is that Microsoft didn't want to have breaking changes, right? People were using either the software development kit or the web application programming interface. They've written code, and they've got the entity, the word entity in there if they were accessing some data. So if they had changed that to table, it would have broken code. So if you're a developer like I am and you've written code, or if you're even going to write more code, you're going to use the older terminology. But in the UI, for the most part, you're going to see the newer names. That's why it's important to understand that. The Microsoft Developer Program, I put this in here to give this a shout out. This is a free tool from Microsoft, if you're not aware of it, free developer sandbox. And don't let the word developer throw you. I make all of my site content admins, all of my project managers, everyone I work with at the Army, I say you should get your own developer sandbox. That way you can go in there, you can try things out. If you go out to a demo like the one we're sitting at today, and someone shows you some neat feature, it's your own tenant. You get a 90-day renewable E5 developers. Last time I did one, it came with 25 users, so I could actually invite some of my team members. You can load sample data, so you don't have that blank slate problem. You can actually work with some of the data that they give you. And it comes with access to experts, recommendations. It's free. Did I mention it's free? I think they ask for a credit card when you first sign up, but then you haven't charged me. I've actually had one for about 8 years now. And the neat thing about that is that the first one I have renews every 120 days because they used to do it longer. It renews. Yeah, so this one here, it says 117 days, but it was supposed to be 120. As long as I'm using it, it automatically renews. I literally get an email from Microsoft every 100 and some days say, congratulations, you've been using it. It's been automatically renewed. And I've got 4 or 5 of these. I think Microsoft has put in some recent changes to try to prevent people from having too many. The last time I signed up for one, I asked for my cell phone and said, oh, that cell phone number's already got one, so maybe use a different cell phone number. So I think they are trying to cut down on abuse of it. It's not meant for production. It's definitely for training and education and testing and all that. But again, I make each one of my developers, all of my program managers, and really, even if they just check the email, that's considered use, and it should get auto renewed after 90 days. So it is really a great little resource. And if you haven't taken advantage of it, that way you don't have to try stuff out with your production environment. You want to try build your own Dataverse table, sign up for this, and then you can play around with Dataverse. And as I mentioned before, learn not just documentation on the web. It really is chock full of tutorials, hands-on labs. There's some of the tutorials will actually have Azure sandboxes, which is free credit. It's like 4 hours to use Azure, or 8 hours depending on the length of the lab. It actually has exam preparations. Microsoft's running a bunch of they just finished a bunch of cloud challenges that were associated with Microsoft Ignite. And I know for the DoD, they just started some more cloud challenges. A cloud challenge is basically Microsoft. You go to Microsoft Learn and you sign up, and it says, if you perform all these modules, we'll give you a free cloud voucher to take an exam. So it really has just so much, and they even had this Learn TV. I've been on an episode or 2 of Learn TV where you can just sit back, kind of YouTube, watch someone talk about, their thoughts on Office 365 or whatever. So lots of information. If you haven't gone out to Microsoft Learn, you should definitely check out Microsoft Learn and see some of the learning. The learning paths, which can include multiple modules, are equivalent to college courses. In fact, I use a lot of these in some of my college courses where I'll say, hey, do module 1 from the Azure fundamentals and turn in the knowledge check. They actually have exam, like little questions, like practice questions that you can do at the end of each module. So I use these in my college classes. It's that level of quality, and they're free. Did I mention free? I'm a big frugal guy. So, all right, let's get into one of our demos. In this demo, we're going to provision our first Dataverse environment. And I mentioned Microsoft Learn because all of these come from Microsoft Learn. If I click on this link, you'll see the tutorial that we use to provision or get started with Microsoft Dataverse for Teams. So let's do that. We'll jump in here. When you if you follow those instructions in the tutorial, it will, and I'll just run through this to show you the tutorial real quick. Basically gives you a quick introduction, talks about what teams, Dataverse for Teams is. And I'll say Dataverse for Teams, and sometimes I'll just say Dataverse. They are two separate animals. They share the same base, but there's a distinction, and I'll talk more about the distinction in a minute. But here we're using Dataverse for Teams, and this walks you through provisioning your first Dataverse environment inside of Teams. And that's, hey, you're adding the Power Apps app, you're clicking on the Power Apps app, you're going to click Start Now, you're going to choose a team, and then you're going to, it'll open up with an app. That is the process of creating the Dataverse database for that team. And so these screens walk through just that. I've clicked on Home, I found the Power Apps application there. I said, yep, I want to include that in some of my teams. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. I actually pinned it to my left-hand navigation, so it's really easy for me to find. And then once that's there, you can click on it and click Start Now. It's going to come up and say, all right, you want to create an app? Which team you want to create an app in? So these are all of my teams in this particular tenant. The way it works is each team gets one Dataverse environment. So it's a one-to-one situation. So I think I chose Demo 1 here. And then it takes a minute. I just click to the next screen, but it will take a minute to actually provision that. And then once it provisions, it asks for the name, and then it provisions the Dataverse for Teams environment. In fact, that's important to note because, so here I am, it comes up and says, hey, what do you want to call your app? I give it a name. It takes more than just a minute, and this can happen. So this is one of the gotchas I like to point out to folks. If you get this, here it says success, it's ready to go, in Demo 1 general channel, that's why I added it. But here it says there's a problem reaching the app. There was no problem reaching the app. I'm just impatient. I literally hit refresh or retry, and then it came up. So it is cloud-based. A lot of times, especially if you're on a slow connection at the Army where we work, the connection's not the fastest, and sometimes you get some of these error messages that are not really error messages. And literally, someone will call me up help desk-wise, and I'll say, just hit refresh. I'm like, no, what are you talking about? I got an error. I'm like, trust me, hitting a refresh took care of that. So in Power Apps, you can get to Dataverse. You can create different kinds of apps from different kinds of data sources, a blank app, data from Dataverse, SharePoint, Excel, SQL, all that stuff. Notice over here, and here's another gotcha. I clicked on environment up here in the right, and it lists some of my environments. Now, when I say some, which ones did it list? It listed my production environment, Apple Forward is production Dataverse, my default, which is Mad SharePoint, and my developers. So you can tell the developer environments because they have people's names associated. So the way a developer environment works is someone can sign up for the Power Apps development plan, and that will create an environment in your production, in your company's environment, but it gives it, it's separate from all the other production. So it's not this production, it's not this production, but it puts the different names. And that way a developer can work in that and easily move things to a different environment if they need to, because it's, it's all under my company's umbrella. So that's slightly different than signing up for Office 365 developer plan, which is a completely different tenant. A Power Apps community plan is an added environment to your existing tenant. But here's the gotcha. So this is Power Apps, and it's showing me these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 environments. I'm looking for Demo 1. Where's Demo 1? Demo 1's not listed. Demo 1 is a Teams Dataverse. So if I go to Power Automate and click Environments, I see all the environments, not just Apple Forward, not just Bailey, David, and Rick's, but I see Demo 1. I see Demo 2. So any team that's had a environment provisioned for it is listed, right? Now I've got more teams than just this, but I've only provisioned apps in Demo 1, 2, Dinner, HR News. But it's interesting that Power Apps will list all the environments Power Automate will list all the environments versus Power Apps it doesn't list the Dataverse for Teams environments. So that's a gotcha, and it drives me nuts. I'll be in Power Apps. I'm like, where's Demo 1? I thought and then I go, oh yeah, it's over in Power Automate. Luckily, if you click the little gear up here, you can go to the Admin Center, and that works whether you're in Power Automate or Power Apps. So either gear will take you to the admin. Has a couple of links. One of the links being the Admin Center. The Admin Center, the Power Platform Admin Center, will show you all the environments, and it'll show you the different type of environment. So this is the view that I prefer, where I can actually see, oh, demo 2 is a Teams Dataverse environment. Managed SharePointers, that's a Teams. HR News is a Teams. Apple Fort, that's production. Managed SharePoint, that's the default in production. And these guys are all, these three at the bottom are all developer. So using the power, and even a regular user can see this. They'll only see the ones they have access to, but in my DoD environment, where I'm just a regular user, I can still get to the Power Platform Admin Center and see any environment that I have permissions to. So this view is really helpful, because this is where later when we want to come back and we want to do backups and restores and things like that, we can use this view to see our different environments. All right, let's move on to the next demo where we create our first table, right? So we left off where we started to create an app, and we wanted to we provisioned Dataverse in at the demo 1 in team. Now this particular demo is going to go, again, we're going to go to that tutorial on Microsoft Learn and see what the steps are. So here it's create your first table to store data. It talks about the Power Apps Table Editor, which is a lightweight editor to create your table and create columns and show existing columns. And they walk you through creating an equipment list column and then a location column. It talks about, the tutorial explains different types of data types that are available, like choice or lookup. And then it talks about another editor. There's actually 2 editors in there. And there's the Power Apps editor, which is not very intuitive. You got to go to build and see all. But the difference between the first editor and this editor is that this editor shows you all the metadata. So the system metadata, as well as the columns that you created, the custom columns. So if you're, if you want to go and look and see it like modified by and created by some of that system metadata, that you can use that other editor to see that. It also talks about permissions. So if you want to see the default permissions, there's full access, collaborate, reference, private, none. You can read about them and how they work, and then you can see how you can assign them to different groups. So in this example, I can see that member has full access by default, but if I want, I could go and change it. And then there's a little check your knowledge if you want to actually take that little sample practice exams. So now in this demo, I'm going to my actual Power Apps environment, and I'm going to complete the tutorial that we started earlier, where I added a app to one of my teams, and now I'm going to go further and add the table. So while it's doing that, I saw a question pop up. Here, let me pause this while I see the question real quick. I'll pause it just a second. Here I am. So I'm starting, I'm creating an app. I'm selecting demo 2. Question: managed environments have visibility across all you showed. So I haven't talked about managed environments, Sean. That's actually, quote unquote, newer feature. I believe it does, but I haven't tried it myself. I haven't used that yet. So that's a good question. I'll have to take that as a homework assignment to verify that. All right. So back here to demo 2. So we're adding the app to demo 2, and it's going to provision the Dataverse for Teams environment into demo 2 team. And then once again it pops up and give your app a name. And now I'm following the tutorial, right? So the tutorial said call it equipment something. So I go ahead and call it equipment something, equipment list, save the app. And then you'll see the screen where you can add data. And there's a couple different places. Microsoft loves to have multiple places where you can click to do the same thing. So in fact, you can see up top, it says add data. So right there, it says add data. Once this screen is loaded, you can see there's a with data to start the screen with data. It's another way to add data. The way the tutorial says is go over here on this little database icon and click create new table. So that's the way we'll do it. We'll click create new table. We'll give it a name. Under advanced settings, you'll see it pluralizes the name. So that's good, because a lot of times database designers like to argue about whether it should be plural or singular. So we'll go ahead and create that table. So again, the database environment, it's been created or been provisioned already. Now I'm adding my own custom table to that environment, right? Remember before we had account and customer address. Now I've added a new table called equips. I'm adding columns now, so I'll create a new column. This is, again, following the tutorial, I think it said add an owner column, so I'm filling out some of the information about the owner. This is who owns the equipment. These are some of the different data types. The tutorial is a little out of date. The tutorial says that there's only certain data types available. Microsoft has since updated the interface, and now all the data types are available. So if you read the tutorial and it talks a little bit about, you can't get to all the data types. I don't believe that's true anymore. I believe all the data types are now available, even in this lightweight. This is the lightweight editor that I talked about. But you still don't see the system metadata in this view, right? Notice in the point of this particular editor was that they wanted to focus on just doing the customizations, right? So I've added name, I've added owner, I've added, I think this is location. So I'm focused on just my, I don't want to necessarily see the system metadata yet. I add what date purchase, and this is just demonstrating the different data types. So this is obviously going to be a date. You can see, things like with the format. And this is an interesting one. I said date only, but what happens in a minute is that even though I said date only for the data type, when I add it to the app, it's still going to have hour and minute, which is kind of a weird thing. So I'll show you a demo of how I deal with that. So there's some of the, so you do see some of the system metadata, right? Like when this record was created on that system metadata, I mean, it's not something I can edit. It's just read-only data the system handles and created by, modified by. So now, let's see, I'm still adding columns. I think I have one more column, equipment type. So this was just to demonstrate the choice data type. So in the equipment type, I'll change the data type to choice, and then you'll see how that works, where you can display different choices. So we'll go ahead and change that to choice. There's an option to have, if there's a global, sort of like master data, a global choice, or I can just say, nah, this is just, it's just for my app. It's not, at the Army, we have, a master list of organizations. So in that case, I might want to go to a global choice. But here, I just, it's just equipment type. So it's just whether it's manufactured or, purchased or something like that. So we add our different choices. Notice it's got the display value, the label versus the internal value. We add a couple of those. I can choose whether I want to have a default choice or not. And then we save that. So once I've got all my custom columns in, I can start adding the data. So that's where I can actually go in the same editor. I've modified the metadata, added my own columns. Now I'm doing CRUD, create, read, update, delete. Now I'm entering, I think I'm going to show a couple existing columns. So I'll go in there and say, yeah, let's also show, in this particular view, let's show, like modified one or something like that. So once I'm happy with my view, then I actually come in here and I can start hand jamming data in. So I'll have things like a Dell PC, and I'll go through this. I might speed up through this just a little bit. Some of the owners, the date it was purchased, choose one of those. It used to be when I first started out with this, there was a little bug where you would see -1 in the equipment type where the choices weren't refreshing right away. And again, it was a situation where you would just close it and reopen it, and all of a sudden it was refreshed. But it looks like they fixed that. So I'm just adding some data, hand jamming some data there. And then at the end, that data will be in my table that I just created. So it really is, I think I demonstrate deleting the record, or you can if you highlight a record. So again, create, read, update, delete, all available from this editor. We'll just fast forward a little bit, choosing the dates, so the date picker. Yeah, so there now that we've got the table with the data in our environment. And this is the sort of the end result. The next step is to then wrap an app around that data. So we provisioned the table, we provisioned the database, we've added a table. Now let's add some user interface. Let's add an app around that. And guess what? There's an article for that from Microsoft Learn. So in Microsoft Learn, that article walks us through selecting the data. So we're just picking up where we left off. There's the equips table that we added. We're going to add it to the screen, use the with data. So from here, when I click that with data, that's where you'll see that I can choose existing tables, or I could even create a new table. So there's the equips table that we just created, but any of the tables in the Dataverse for Teams environment are fair game. I could even go out to another connector and connect to some other data source if I wanted to. So this is just showing me my current environment, but that doesn't mean I couldn't add other data over here on the left-hand side. So I think I did choose the equips table, hopefully. And what happens is, by choosing this table, it's going to automatically generate, they talk about no code, low code. It's going to automatically generate the code and the user interface that's connected, does all the data plumbing, the data access layer to my equips table in Dataverse. So you'll see that it uses the hero template to have both navigation, so I can navigate through the different records or add a new record on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, depending on what record I select, you get the details of that record. So you get, the name, equipment type, all the columns. I can preview the app. That's what I'm doing here. So I'm just going through and I'm choosing the first record and making an update. So it really, that's simple to, now that I've created the table and I want to work with that data, right in the Power App Studio, I'm making my changes. Now here's that one thing that I thought was interesting, because I did tell the data type to be just date only, and yet the code that got generated included hours and minutes. So I'm going to go in here and make a change to that. And the interesting thing is, they call this no code, low code. This is where the low code comes into play, right? Because now I'm going to go remove those columns or those display fields, right? I'm going to delete. I just highlight and say, hey, get rid of the hour value, and then go get rid of the minute value, right? I don't want that. I don't want that to be displayed. Oh, got rid of them both. But notice there's an error. So the app checker over here in the top corner here, this little stethoscope is called the app checker. That's warning me I've got problems, and this too is warning me I got problems because I deleted those display values, and they were being referenced in a formula. So here's where low code comes in. So now it looks like the date purchased. No, that one's okay. Or no, yeah, that's the one that's referencing the minute value and the hour value, and that's not, it's got an error because they're not there anymore. So what I got to do is I'm going to have to unlock that column so I can edit that formula so the error is no longer there. And that's what I do next, is I walk through the steps of unlocking the column and modifying the formula to remove those values. So I see, while I'm doing that, I see a question out in the chat. Are you only limited to one table on your Power Apps, or can you add definitely multiple tables, multiple data sources, multiple tables from each of those data source? So yeah, great question. No, the answer is no, you're not limited. Good question. All right, so you can see here I've unlocked it. I'm going into my my formula now, and it's not that hard, low code. I just got to go for, and even more, the little formula editor here, it's giving me squigglies and let me know what's no longer valid. It has a little bit of intelligence that'll tell me what some values, are valid. So I go through here, and I'm a little impatient. I'll just speed through as I go through and do the deletes, and then I can go preview the app again, and now it looks like everything's fine. So that, again, low code, no code, it generated a bunch of it for me, but as you make changes, you might need to go in there and make modifications based on whatever changes you made. So, or even if you do, extensions and customizations. And I think I went through there, I did another one just to demo it. Yeah, and then you can see some of the errors again using the app checker. And then finally it's done. Oh, did I skip publishing the teams? I shouldn't skip publishing the teams. So whenever I was done, you can click publishing the teams. Let's see, where did that happen? And then, so this little icon right here, if I can pause on it for a second, there we go. Allows me to publish my app to teams. That makes it available to teams, where then someone can go to the teams channel and click on demo one, and then see the app and use the app from teams. So that's the last step, is where after I've made my customizations, my modifications, I publish the app to teams, and then anyone that has permissions can go out to that and make modifications. And here I'm looking at some of the other things I published out there. I've got a computers app, I've got a lunch idea app, just whatever I have out there for this particular team. All right. So there's the, we did that already, okay. Let's talk about some other things you can do in Dataverse. So a lot of times people say, well, can I do, workflows? And I'm an old SharePoint developer from, back in, I actually started with 2001. So, I've got a lot of workflows on premises still that I'm upgrading and moving to the cloud. And the answer is Power Automate, create a flow. And you can do that with Dataverse. So there's a night, and guess what? Microsoft Learn has a nice article on how to create an automated flow using Dataverse. The key is you create, if you're not familiar with flow, is you create a trigger and then you create an action. And it can be more complicated than that, but That's the simple, if I want to initiate a flow from Dataverse, I can choose these triggers that, when a record is selected or created or updated, deleted. Well, that sounds familiar. Create, read, update, delete. Do some action. So let's take a look at that. Now, in this particular demo, what I'm going to demo is I'm looking at Dataverse. When someone adds an account, I'm going to take that data and put it into SharePoint so that someone can just see new accounts in SharePoint without having to go to Dataverse. So I thought I had, did I not? Yeah, here we go. I think this is it. All right, so let's go in here. So we're going to go ahead and create our new flow. So I'm in Power Automate. I'm saying I'm going to go create a flow. Give it a name. I think this is, like I said, the scenario is I'm creating a new account, or when a new account happens, so someone adds a new account in Dataverse, I'm going to trigger off of that. And so here I'm just saying, hey, what's my flow's trigger? By typing in Dataverse, it limits, because there's tons of triggers to choose from. It just gives me a filter on the triggers that I want to choose from. So I chose the Dataverse when a row is added, modified, or deleted trigger. So I'll keep it simple. I say just add it. Let's only look for when it's added. I need a table. So again, now this is important. I'm pausing. I'll talk about this a little. The environment up here. I'm actually doing this particular flow from my developer environment. If I wanted to do it from a Teams for Dataverse environment, you have to pay attention to which environment you're in. I don't know how many times I've done a flow in the wrong environment, and then when I switch over to Power Apps or something, I'm looking for it and it's not there. So be aware of what environment you're in. So I'm doing this in my developer environment. Okay, so let's go ahead and choose the table. So these are all the tables that are available in this particular environment. So I'm going to choose the accounts table. And then scope is, business unit, organization, just a certain user. I did it for everybody, so the whole organization. And if you want to see, I always like to click on the advanced options just to see what they say. This is if I want to only do certain columns, maybe for performance reasons, or filter to different rows, or run as a different user. So all sorts of different advanced options. So that's my trigger. The next is my action. And just like with triggers, there's tons of actions from lots of different places. There's built-in ones, standard ones, premium ones, etc. I only want the actions that are associated with SharePoint. So I'm going to go ahead and type SharePoint in there, and that'll filter and only show me SharePoint action. I'm going to speed up a little bit through it to get to it because it took a second. I was on a slow connection. When I did this demo, I was on a particularly slow connection, and I thought, well, let me leave this in here just to kind of demonstrate. It's not hung up. It's just slow Wi-Fi. It's interesting that the slow Wi-Fi manifests this particular behavior. It's not throwing an error in particularly, it's just running, it's just taking a while to communicate. So we go ahead and type in SharePoint so we only see the SharePoint triggers or actions, excuse me. Again, it's normally not this slow. This was a particularly slow. So let me fast forward through some of this.
You're doing business in an app-driven multi-cloud world. You want to build and run your apps on your choice of...
my Alexa said, hey, Dave, you got a reminder. Thanks for that, Alexa. All right, where were we? So we're going through and we're looking at the different actions, and we're going to go ahead and choose create item, because that's what we said the scenario was, that whenever someone adds an account in Dataverse, we're going to use this flow to create an item in SharePoint so my SharePoint users can see the new account. So we'll choose that action. And then it's going to come up with the card for that action. It's going to say, hey, which SharePoint site do you want to target? So I've got, it's Office 365, so it sees all the sites that I have access to. And then what list? So I chose the HR site. There's only one list in the HR site that's applicable for this. So the new accounts list. If it wasn't there, I'd have to go out and create it. And again, under advanced options, you can limit the columns. If you want to pick a particular view, you can, actually, I think that's the only advanced option. So once I turn that off, that goes away. But here's where you map data from Dataverse to a column in SharePoint. So I'm using the dynamic content. I'm choosing the account name. I'm going to say, let's put that in title. And then it looks like there's a phone number that's associated. This is tricky because there's like 4 different phone numbers with the standard account record. So there's the main phone, there's address telephone 1, So the very first time I did this, I chose the wrong one. It was showing up blank. So I know it's main phone now. So we mapped account name to title, main phone to phone number. And now in that SharePoint list, title and phone number should get account name and main phone from Dataverse. So looks like it's ready to go. I didn't like forget to put anything in. If I had, just like we had the app checker in Power Apps, there's a flow checker in Power Automate, and everything looks good. If I had messed something up, I'll mess something up on purpose just to show you. It's, hey, you didn't enter in title, you got to do that. And sometimes it'll give you, warnings or errors, but in this case, it's, this is not going to work, so I got to go fix it. Oh, you can't just type it in either. You do have to choose it from dynamic content. So I tried to type it in to see if I could, recognize it. It's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. So let me choose it correctly, and then the account name should be valid. So once I've done it the right way, I can save it. I can test it. A couple different ways you can test it. The very first time, this particular type of flow, I've got to go and do a, I have to trigger it. So I got to go add a record to the account so it actually triggers it. But once I've done that, I can reuse that action and do a test right from here. That's where you see up here in the corner is a little test. So, I went, I saved it. I think it warned me I was trying to click off without, I didn't hit save yet, so I had to make sure I hit save. So notice there's two edits. There's edit here and edit there. They do different things. I wish they would name them differently. So one edit is the properties, what the name of the flow, what's the status when it was created. The other edit is actually in, the format of the flow, the triggers and actions that we were just in. So this edit's nice. You can do things like, who's the owner, but that edit is the one you want when you're actually making changes to it, where you want to go in, add a new action, add a new trigger, or make changes to existing ones. So just be aware, people, again, as I've helped people work with Power Automate, they'll say, hey, I clicked on edit, I'm not seeing the right thing. And I'll say, well, which edit you click on? There's more than one. So the next thing we're doing is we're going out and trying to trigger that flow. So let me fast forward a little bit, or that might be the next demo, actually. So here we are. We're looking at the flow, and I think what we're going to do is rename it. So it's not very intuitive. I clicked up here in the corner to rename it. And again, if you try to go off of it, it's you got to hit save. So it's not auto save. You got to be careful of that. Where Power Apps, after you save it one time, it will auto save every couple of minutes. Power Automate, you got to hit save to make those changes. And I've done that before, where I've made a change and then just ignored the warning, and then my change didn't get saved. I'm like, oh no, what did I do? So trying to point out all the gotchas, as many gotchas as I can. All right. So the next step is to test the flow, where we actually trigger it and see the results. And let's do that. So let's come in here. So now we've got our flow. It's ready to go. They said, hey, why don't you test it? If I go to my flows in Power Automate, you'll see all the flows that I've created, unless I shared them with someone, right? Once they get shared, they get moved over to shared with me, or someone shared it with me, they get moved over. You can see I've got some flows that use premium connectors, some flows that don't use premium connectors. So in this example, I'm going to go to I'm in my developer environment. I'm going to go to Dataverse by clicking on Data and Tables. Oh, and then notice up here, it still says entities. So even in the UI, there's places where we still use the old terms. So it doesn't say tables on it, but in the URL, it says entities. So we've gone there, and now we're going to go into that environment. But basically what we're doing is we're going to add an account. So let me fast forward through that a little bit. Yeah, entities, we saw that. Okay. So I'm into Dataverse inside Power Apps in my developer environment. So the same environment, that's good. It's giving me all the little, hey, welcome messages. And then I'm going to go into my accounts table and edit the data. And then once I edit the data, I'm going to hand jam some data in there. So there's the existing data. You can see I've got things like the AAA account and First Coffee account and Burger King. So I'm a big foodie guy. I think I added some more burger accounts. Obviously, I was hungry for a burger when I did this demo. So what do we add in here? Just my new account. Well, that's kind of boring, but I did demo. And then when it runs, this is where you go back to Power Automate and refresh the run history. And after a certain amount of time, it should show up if everything's working as expected. Again, this was a really slow connection, so it took a minute or two for them to show up. I think I went back and I added another account just in case. A second new account. I was worried that something wasn't working, but it just turns out my slow connection was manifesting itself in a couple different ways, specifically not showing the run history right away. I made sure my status was on, all the things you want to check, the flow is on, you're in the right environment. So there's a list of things to check if things aren't going wrong. But it was just, again, impatience on my part. So there we can see it was triggered successfully, the flow ran, and then the data moved from Dataverse, or was copied from Dataverse into SharePoint. You can actually go back to the flow by clicking on the run history, and you'll see some of the data that was pulled out of Dataverse and moved over to, or copied over to SharePoint. So what's nice is you can actually go through there and see what's called the JSON, the JavaScript object notation. The one time I did it with the wrong phone, when I chose the wrong phone number, I did some debugging. The flow ran as expected, but I was able to go into the JSON and look and see that the phone number was blank. I was like, oh, I guess I chose the wrong date. So there's the JSON right there where you can see like display name and email and all that. So that gets really helpful. Even if a flow runs successfully, sometimes you want to go and look at the outputs and inputs to see if the data is as expected. All right, so let's recap the demo. We created a new flow. We added a new record, ran the flow. Results went over to SharePoint, and then we went into the flow in the run history and saw some of the data as it moved. Now let's do some more with Dataverse. What are we going to do? We got up next here, we're going to import data into Excel. I talked about that early on, using the add-in to do create, read, update, delete. We'll do a backup and restore of a database environment, and we'll export a solution, which is not just the Dataverse, but also any apps that are associated with it. All right, by now I'm starting to sound like a broken record. Guess what? If you want to do import and export from Dataverse, there's a tutorial and Microsoft Learn for that. So it walks you through doing the import and export. So I'm going out to Power Apps, and I'm looking at my different environments. Let's go ahead and start this demo. So there's my tables. I've got a computer table, an equipment table, an item table. So in this particular environment, this is a Dataverse for Teams environment. I'm just playing around with the columns. Let's move ahead to our export. I think what I did is I changed the columns to a certain format so that it would match my import. So I'm going to import some data from an Excel spreadsheet, and I wanted the columns, the view, to match whatever data was coming in. So here you can see I'm choosing, hey, it was all sorts of different, let me back up that, because I kind of went through that a little too fast. There's a lot of different sources that you can choose from. Excel, text, XML, JSON, PDF, Dataverse, the list goes on and on. So, and this is you can even have custom connectors if your particular one's not listed here. So let me go ahead and finish. So we kept it simple. We just say, hey, we're going to pull data into Dataverse from Excel. So I link to the file. I could, if it's on your OneDrive, then you can set up a refresh schedule. And actually what I'm doing here by setting up this import is I'm setting up a data flow. So it actually is something I can schedule and run on a scheduled basis. One pet peeve of mine here is the small little window that they give me. So as I go through here, I'm trying to find the file I want to import in my OneDrive, and I realize, why are they only showing me 4 files at once? So maybe they'll fix that the next time I go in here. I have to go up to the user voice and submit an enhancement request. Give me a bigger window. So I'll go ahead and I select the file I want to import. I think it's a laptop file. So yeah, this is the actual data that we're importing. It's laptops that belong to Barney Rubble and Fred Flintstone. If you guys know who those are, that's a bonus. I'm just making some changes to the data so that when I import it, we'll see those changes. And while I'm doing that, I see a question. Which source do you suggest is the best to use in Dataverse? It depends. That's a standard developer or consultant answer, right? It really is, I get a lot of data from Excel. People have tons of data in Excel, so I do a lot of data from Excel into Dataverse. But I've had data from some SQL Server, data from, I'm working on now a custom connector from our timesheet, which is a Deltek system. As long as it has an API, you can do it. So it really depends, Emma. Good question. Here I am. So this is that Power Query. So we're pulling in, just like we did with when we loaded data into Power BI, we're loading data in, we're building a data flow, and we're using, again, Power Query to pull in that data. So if you haven't used Power Query, I talked a little bit before about extract, transform, and load. This over here is what's happening. It's building the ETL steps, right? This is the source step. This is, we navigated to a certain table in the source. And as we go through here, it's loading, the different columns, name, owner. Notice it changed the column names. And I think what I did is I said, you know what, that owner, I don't like the fact that it's Barney Rubble or Fred Flintstone. Let's split that up. Let's have owner name 1, owner name 2, so that they can be distinct attributes using database design technology, right? I want them to be, I don't want them to be a composite attribute. I want them to be distinct attributes. So, so yeah, I'm just coming in here. I'm using the split column from the ribbon to say, hey, this owner column has a space. That's the delimiter. And now, and again, notice under applied steps, it stored that step. That way, every time I hit refresh, it will reapply all those extract, transform, and load steps and reapply, the transformations. Here you can see the different load settings. I'm going to load to an existing table, so I'll go choose a table. It's important that you know the internal name, right? So this is not showing display names. This is showing internal names. So I'll scroll down here and choose computers, which is CRF5F, because that's the internal name of the computers table. And then it should show me that. Now I got a map. Which column goes to which column, right? So the column from my Excel spreadsheet is going to belong to which column in my Dataverse table. So this is where I actually choose date deployed is going to be date purchase, we'll say. Location, looks like I don't know if I have a location, so I'll leave that blank. Name, we'll choose the name that's in the data sheet, and then I think I'll take owner 1 and put that in the notes since I don't have an owner 1, Once I feel good about my mapping, I can publish it. And now that data flow will be out there under, listed with all my data flows, and it'll run, and I can schedule it to run multiple times. And once it runs, the data will be updated and you'll see it there. So let me fast forward a little bit. And then you can see it. So here's where the data, and I keep hitting refresh until the data, because the data flow it's not instantaneous. It takes a little bit to get out there and run, and then eventually it'll show up and you'll see the data. So here is the data flow under, if I go to data flows for that, the particular environment I was in was the environment in my demo 1 team. So I can see I've got 2 data flows that I did. And the one that I did in the last demo was this one here. I clicked it and did a refresh, so you could see that it was actually, refreshing the data. It's in progress. Moving on, let's do editing data with Excel. So this is different than importing data from Excel, right? That's just someone has 1,000,000 rows or however many rows in Excel, and they import it into Dataverse. Now I'm using Excel to maintain my data. I actually want to start with Dataverse, pull it out to Excel, make changes, and put that data back. So let's look at that. So here we're going to go into our Dataverse. I'm going to choose Edit Data in Excel. That's important because now what it's going to do is it's going to open up an Excel spreadsheet that has the add-in already activated and available inside of it. That's what we're seeing there in the download. So it's a special Excel spreadsheet, so different than the one we just looked at. I'm going to enable editing because I want to activate the add-in. So there's the Microsoft Power Apps Office add-in. It automatically signed in as me. Sometimes, for whatever reason, it doesn't, and I'll just have to sign in, but this one, single sign-in worked. And now it loaded all that data from that particular Dataverse environment. So now I can do all the operations like if I was working on the web. I can do an update, so I just updated row 1 there. I can add new rows. I can delete rows. Notice as I'm choosing the owner is a lookup column, so it gives me options, proper options to choose. If I try to make a change to a read-only field, I think status is read-only. It'll just ignore that. It'll warn me, hey, you tried to update a read-only field. We're going to throw that away. So I'm going through here. I'm making changes to the name, the owner, the date deployed, adding new records. I think the final thing I do is delete one record. So as I'm going through here making these changes, it's keeping track of how many additions I did, how many edits I did, how many deletes I did, so that when I hit publish, it will batch them all up and send them back to Dataverse. And again, that's the real wow factor here, is that I'm able to maintain my data using Excel, but it still lives out there in Dataverse where everyone can get to it. So as I go through here and I'm making my changes, fast forward just a little bit. I just skipped over the delete, so I did a delete there. Now I hit publish. And again, I think I updated one of the read-only fields, so it's going to throw that away, no big deal. Now it's telling me, hey, we're going to publish. You created one row, we're going to insert that row. We're going to make changes to 4 rows, and we're removing a row based on what you just did. I'll say, yep, that sounds good. It's going to send those all back. And if I go back to Dataverse, you'll see those changes have been applied as promised. So again, a really powerful tool, especially for those folks who didn't want to give me their data. Dave, I've been using Excel, no, you can still do that. And they don't have to do this edit with Excel, but one time. Now they can open that Excel spreadsheet and that can be their baby where they go and they make their changes, and that's how they maintain their data. So it really is a, set it and forget it, and now they're going to make their changes and they're really happy. All right. Importing, I think this is my final demo. Or no, back up, two more demos. This is import and export solutions. So in this particular one, we've got, we've created several different tables. We've created several different apps around those tables. We want to share them with somebody else, right? Maybe I want to give them to my admin to deploy to production. Maybe I'm just sharing them with another colleague so they can import them and take a look at them. So we're going to go into our Dataverse for Teams, the one that we did in demo 1. We're going to see that we have all these computers app, equipment list demo app, and the tables that those apps are dependent on. And we want to select them and then share them with somebody else. So that's what I'm going through here. And I've selected the 3 apps. I think I select equipment, what's for lunch, equipment list demo, and computers. So I'm going to go ahead and click export as a solution. And what this does, it creates a zip file that I can email to somebody. So notice it automatically chooses the dependencies. So computers is dependent on the computers table. Equipment list demo needs the equipment table. What's for lunch doesn't, it's just an app. There's no tables. I could, if maybe if I already done an export, I don't need to re-export the tables. I could choose not to do the dependencies, but by default it says let's accept all dependencies. So now it's going to create that zip file, and then again I can email that to someone. I can put it out on a SharePoint, whatever if I want. So that file contains everything I need for someone else to bring that into their environment to recreate the tables, the data, and the apps. And in fact, the next part of this step, I just changed to a different team. So this is my HR News team, and I'm going to import that what I just export just to show you the process. So in the HR News teams, now I go over here and I'll say, okay, right now I've got an equipment app, but I'm going to go import that solution. And again, you just go out, you get, so, they might have emailed me the file. I think what did I store it in my downloads? I'll go ahead and grab that. When you open that zip file, it will parse it and show you everything that's in there. And I can, for some reason, maybe I don't need the equipment table, I could uncheck it. But in this case, I'll just overwrite everything. So I'll just bring it in. And then it'll import those changes. Now, it's not instantaneous. It does take a minute. But, assuming there's nothing like missing dependencies or I don't know, I had a hard time breaking it. I did finally break it because I wanted to show you guys what it would look like if something failed. But it for the most part, it works, especially if you're in the same tenant, same environment type of thing. I think right near the end, do I show you what the result looks like? Let's go here. So this is the end result. This is HR News, and these are all the things, the equipment, the what's for lunch, the equipment list demo, and the computers app, and their associated tables have all now been brought in to the HR News because I did that import. Under solutions, so if I go out to the Power Apps Admin Center and click on solutions, this is a list of all the imports that I've done and their status or the result. And you'll notice I did one at the very end there called Publish All. That one, I went and removed some dependencies and I forced it to fail just because I want to show you what a failure might look like. So they're not guaranteed to work, but I had a lot of success and I had to go through some effort to to force one to fail, just to see what that would look like. But this is where you would go if you wanted to see a record of the different, the success or failure of the different imports. All right, this is the last demo, backup and restore. So you've got your Dataverse databases out there, and now you want to back up and restore them. So I'm going out there to my different, to my Power Apps admin center so I can see all my environments. And I think I clicked around a little bit and I was showing off different things when I first did this. So we'll fast forward a little bit through some of this stuff. Yeah, I'm showing off like you can clone, you can do all sorts of other features in there. But we're going to go and we're going to right click on or go to the ellipsis, and under backups, I can say I want to create a backup. Now, backups happen automatically and they're stored for 7 days. So you do have system backups, but you can also do a manual backup. So if I want to do a manual backup, maybe right before I'm going to do some major data operation and I'm afraid it might go wrong. I've done this when I had my DBA hat on for 10 years. And whenever Dave, I need to pull, you're going to import a lot of data and it could go horrible. I would do a backup first, then I would do the import. And if it went badly, I would do a restore. So I recommend that highly. This is a great, great scenario where, I'm going to load, 10,000 records and I might map them erroneously. Or, and you know what? Forget. Do the backup anyway, even if you don't think anything. That's when you think something's not going to go wrong. That's when you're going to need it. So I'm a big backup a fan of doing backups just in case. So that's when I did my manual backup. As you can see, there's system backups too. It's there. It's only there for 7 days. It's cloud-based. Now, I guess I'm doing a restore. So be aware that if you need data longer, you do need to do like an archive or something like that. Now I'm demonstrating again that sometimes you get errors like this. This is not a real error. Even though it looks like a real error, cannot read properties of toString. This is just because I'm impatient. Literally, the backup was instantaneous, or felt like it was instantaneous. The restore takes 15 to 20 minutes, and this did not even have a lot of data. So as I'm knocking around here and I'm looking for success on the restore, I'm really just being impatient. As I fast forward through some of this demo here, you'll see I did a second one and said, well, man, why am I getting this error message? But what really the issue really is that I'm impatient. So once it's done, I just kept hitting refresh, and eventually it came up and got rid of that error message, check status, and now I can see, oh, it was prepared, validated, it's still running at this moment, and after about 15, 20 minutes, it said succeeded on the restore. So even though the backup lickety split, restore is going to take a minute. Once the restore completely finishes, you get a nice little timeline of the restore. So right now it's still running. We'll go ahead and fast forward a little bit more. There's the completed restore. It says when it was started, the start time, the end time, who it was initiated by, and then finally when it was completed. So there is a nice little timeline once it finally completes, so you can see the complete status of the restores. All right, a little tidbit about, I mentioned Dataverse for Teams and Dataverse, and they are different. So Dataverse for Teams is Dataverse Lite. It's already included in your Office 365, in just about every Office. There's a couple where it's not, but for almost all Office 365 licenses, Dataverse for Teams is included, meaning you've already paid for it. Sometimes people say it's free. Well, you already paid for it. So you can go out to Teams, go to your, add that app, create that Dataverse for Teams, add tables. It's because it's already included, there's a limit. You can get about 1 million rows in there. It says here 2 GB, but you have to account for metadata. So it's really more like 1.75 GB because you got to give a little bit for the metadata. And then if you find that you've built an app and it's incredibly popular and you need more data, you can upgrade your Dataverse for Teams to Dataverse. So that's the nice thing, is that you can right click and say, hey, now when you do that, you're gonna have to pay, right? You have to buy capacity. So it's not included. Dataverse, that's the big thing with Dataverse, is it costs more money. It's additional licensing. It does give you unlimited environments. You can create trial environments, multiple production environments, sandbox environments. There's all sorts of different environments, developer environments. 4 terabytes or more, and it's the real deal Dataverse. I failed to mention that there's also, I showed you how to create your own custom app, but there's also template apps out there. So if you want to create your own template app, there's Microsoft gives you, the employee ideas app, the inspection app, issue reporting app. They're all built in. You can start with those. You don't have to create from scratch. There's lots of resources on the Teams developer portal to best practices and things like that. There's information about Teams admin if you want to set policies to prevent certain things. There's the roadmap to features that are coming. The technical community, which is a great place to go out and ask questions when you're in trouble. User voice, which they've recently updated. I forget what the new name is now, but that's where you can recommend changes and improvements. And then if you want to, find out tips and tricks for how to get people to use these apps that you're creating, Teams, there's a link on driving adoption in your company. As far as Power Apps, there's actually links just for Power Apps, and all these links are in my slides, so you don't worry about capturing them now. But there's samples, there's MVP put out a Learn Academy, a bunch of great YouTube-like videos to how to do more with Power Apps, and then from Microsoft Learn, they have their own section on Power Platform training. Finally, specific to Dataverse, the article on how Dataverse, more details on how Dataverse for Teams and Dataverse are different. There's a whole Dataverse developer guide that talks about best practices. There's a community dedicated to the patterns and practices, P&P, for Microsoft 65. And there's even a YouTube channel where you can just kind of sit back, relax, eat popcorn, and hear what people are doing in Dataverse. So with that, if you have any questions, throw them out in the chat. We got a couple minutes left. I know we got to have a minute to give away the $25 gift card, and I've got a couple questions, pop quiz for you guys, see who's been paying attention. So I'm using the chat for the answers. The first question for a free Pluralsight 1-month path: what is the name of the table editor that shows system-created columns? So I glossed over that. I'll take any answer. I don't think I called this out. I mentioned that there was 2 different table editors, but I don't think I named the second table editor. It's in the tutorial. Does anyone have any idea what the name of either of those table editors that I showed from the Power Apps was called? I'll give it a second, and if you don't have it, I'll just throw it out there. All right, I'll just, because I think I might have not done a good job on explaining this one. The Power Apps table editor, so not the visual editor, but the table editor is the one that allows you to get to the system, the metadata, and all that. And since Kathy was the one who said throw it, if you want the Pluralsight, Kathy, shoot me an email and I'll send it to you. So I'm an easy grader. I should have told you guys that. All right, prize slide number 2. What is the name of the default template when creating a Dataverse app in Teams? I, again, briefly mentioned this. I said it was the something template. It's four letters. I even tell you it begins with an H. So if anyone can tell me what that word is, the something template, it's the no code, low code that had the navigation on the left-hand side and the detail on the right-hand side. Anyone, any idea at all what the template is called? Begins with an H, ends with an O, has an ER in the middle. Going once, going twice. Nobody? All right, that's okay. It's the hero template. So SharePoint Online has the hero web part. Power Apps has the hero template. Final question. This is the tough one. So those were supposed to be the softballs. What does MCP dead stand for? This was way back in the beginning. I was, toot my own horn about all these certifications I have, and I mentioned the MCP dead, which I thought is hilarious, and I kind of rattled off what it stood for. I will take any guess. The first one that guesses what it stands for doesn't have to be correct. Whoever puts it out in the chat, you win the prize. It could be insanely wrong. I don't care. What do you think? And I'll even tell you, it stands for Microsoft Certified Professional Developer. What's the EAD stand for? Anybody? Going once, going twice. I'll tell you. Enterprise Application Developer. It's a mouthful. I had to take some VB6 exams for that one, so that's showing my age there. All right, folks. Well, I really appreciate it. We got a couple minutes left. I'll turn it back over so we can give away the $25 gift card. Thank you very much. There's my email if you have questions after the fact. I really appreciate your time today and listening. Thanks again, everybody.